I really wanted to put out another video last month, but to my great irritation, university picked back up again, which I frankly should have seen coming. And also, I got really sick, and it turns out you're supposed to take time off when you're sick, even when you're self-employed. Frankly, work would have been impossible. I was seriously hit, and I infected my loved ones as well, who came by to help me, which just goes to show you that you should never help anyone or be a decent human being. I did actually make a little piece of content that you probably haven't heard about. I was interviewed by the good folks over at St. Pete by Night, which is sort of a West Marches-style open game for vampire, hunter, and werewolf in St. Petersburg, Florida. Get it? It's West Marches because it's St. Petersburg, Florida is in the west of Florida, and it's a swampy, marshy terrain. It's the West Marches. Anyway, they interviewed me. You should check that out. It should be popping up right about now. So I think up here. It was a really nice interview. I enjoyed the hell out of it. Luckily, it was one of the really good days of my sickness. Now that I'm returning to the land of the living, or rather now that I am back here, I'm still a bit stuffy. I wasn't fully recovered when I wrote this script, but now I'm pretty much fine. I also have another thing for you. I made a role-playing game, and it was kind of an accident that I did that. And you're getting it for free, because I'm not just a terrible businessman and don't want to deal with the hassle of selling this. I also don't really think I should, because it came out as me trying to develop a sort of resource for myself for games that I want to run, and that's what I'm passing along to you now as well. Technically a game, mainly a repository of rules and information. You might remember a few years ago I did a video about City of Mist, a mythology-infused noir detective RPG that was making the rounds back then, and which was instantly catapulted up to being my favorite role-playing game. Yes, actually, World of Darkness is not my favorite role-playing system, even though I do love it. This wasn't necessarily because of the setting or the premise, even though I think, it rules, but because of the actual system, which worked on Powered by the Apocalypse principles, but it introduced this new principle as well of characters not having stats, but tags that describe them. For instance, if you're trying to pick a lock and your character has the tags professional burglar and quality pick set, you'd get a +2 bonus to your roll to attempt that. Just the notion that you don't even need abstract stats to describe your character in ways that often, frankly, makes up making zero sense was mind-blowing to me at the time. Instead of having to bump up your charisma, even though you only want to be good at intimidation specifically, having to make weird house rules and exceptions to achieve that sort of thing, you could just describe your character as intimidating, and they would be intimidating. I've dug a lot deeper into game design since then, partly because of this project, and tags have become one of the defining ideas of my personal design philosophy. It feels good and right to me to have the description of the character be the stats of the character. It feels intuitive, closer to the campfire storytelling and play pretending that defines the role-playing aspect of what we do these days. I realize there's other preferences for play, and I respect that. I just don't personally prefer them. So I saw A City of Mist and thought, damn, you could run pretty much any setting with this. But I was thinking about the underlying principle, not the actual game. City of Mist is actually very focused in its design on being specifically what it is, a role-playing game about supernatural detectives imbued with powers from stories. It's extremely good at doing that, and you couldn't just use it to play a space opera, or medieval low fantasy, or a game where you're clockwork automatons trying to spelunk the insides of the last dying sun for a little more time. Then they announced Metro Otherscape, their cyberpunk game, which is really just City of Mist plus cyberpunk. They kept all the supernatural stuff, and I'm really excited for it. I was part of the original playtest, I backed it on Kickstarter, and the whole thing. I'm really fucking in on this game. I have the book right now actually as a PDF. I've just been too sick to read it. But what they did here, and what it was clear they were planning on doing from the very beginning, was once again a game that strongly supports its setting and vibe with specific game mechanics, which is good design, just to put that out there. I, however, had been hoping for a sort of setting agnostic system to rule them all, because I like genre hopping. I like prototyping different settings. I do this thing where I sit down for a one-shot with a bunch of people and we will like brainstorm a quick setting together and then play in that. I've ran like dwarves on stone ships swimming on the lava lakes of the underworld, an ancient tower city ruled by vampires with like alien ghosts on the lower levels, underwater genetic engineering, werebeast politics, fantasy heist in Airship City with carriages pulled by dragons and wyverns, all in the last year. It's fascinating what a small group of people can come up with in 10 minutes. And I wanted something that could accommodate this principle and also in longer campaigns potentially, because I was using like super stripped down tag-based systems for most of these things that didn't really have the level of depth that I would have liked, and guidance also. And I wanted to play Mass Effect and Elder Scrolls and The Expanse and all manner of stuff where I was just not satisfied with the systems that are available. Tag-based play is easy to communicate to people. They don't need to learn any super complicated abstraction of the fiction they know in order to build a particular character they have in mind. They can just use their knowledge of the lore of the setting to describe a thing and then be it. Which is, in my opinion, the platonic ideal of roleplay. So I started, for my own sake, to take apart City of Mist, look at its fundamentals, and reconstitute it as a setting-agnostic system so I could use it in my own games, privately, with my own players. And then I learned that there is no copyright on game rules. It's true, they're like recipes. You cannot trademark them. It's legally impossible to do that. You can trademark associated concepts and names and like the actual text that describes your rules, but someone can come along and just use different words to describe the same rules, and that's completely legally impervious. Big RPG publishers put out SRDs, system reference documents, with certain licensing agreements so you can use copyrighted aspects of their setting without them giving the impression that they want those concepts in the public domain. And let's be serious, in many cases also some of them do it to make it seem as though their game rules are copyrighted and you need to agree to that specific licensing arrangement. This knowledge is something the whole RPG design space is sort of built on, really, stealing mechanics. All those OSR games are based on old D&D rules. City of Mist itself is part of the Powered by the Apocalypse philosophy of game design. I think the new like Critical Role, Candela Obscura thing is based on like Blades in the Dark design ideas. This legal protection of the ability to give and take ideas has created an incredibly productive and fertile creative space, and one can only wonder what would happen if this was applied in other creative fields as it used to be, actually. But this is not going to be a video on how copyright is bad for art and artists and only useful for the sort of like parasitic middlemen that bleed those same artists of their creativity. You should go like Google Cory Doctorow, what he has to say about that. He says it much better than I ever could. My point being, I spent the last couple years putting together this big and I hope neatly formatted Google Doc called Place of Thing, and it exists right now. You can go to it, read it. It's in the link is in the description. It should be the first item in there, right above the Patreon even. Go to it, read it, use it, take whatever is in it and adapt it to whatever you feel like working with, and I can actually share that with you without risking a lawsuit. Not that I expect Son of Oak, the company that makes City of Mist, to do that. They strike me as like a pretty small and passionate operation, and also, I mean, you know, it's a Powered by the Apocalypse game. Like, the whole premise of the basic mechanic of their game is stolen, if you will, in that sense. But they couldn't do it even if they wanted to, is my point. And you know, you could go read that document right now, or you could listen to me talk about it for a little, what you can do with it, what I was thinking, and why I took the design decisions that I took. I'm not going to talk about like every single rule and alternative rule in here, but if you watch the video, you should have a solid basic understanding of the system. It is a fully functional and finished system. However, I think it only really becomes meaningful once you apply it to something specific, like the thing that you actually want to play, which is why I prefer to think of it as a system skeleton, and the meat is what's actually going to allow you to do what you want to do, But there is also a lot of meat in the document that you can slap on there if you want to. So of course the basic mechanic is the 2d6 plus power roll that we know from Powered by the Apocalypse. Whenever there is doubt in a situation, whenever we need to roll dice, these are the dice we roll. The GM never rolls dice, they do not have to. The outcomes are already covered by the rolls the players make. And GMs don't play the game as players do, but as narrative arbitrators. Every time you roll dice, you make what is called a move. This game has 5 different basic moves, and every one of them has a different set of outcomes. Fundamentally though, all moves are constructed in the same way, which makes it easy to improvise when you need to do a little improvising. The 3 key outcomes are, at its simplest, 10 or more, yes, you manage to do what you set out to do, you hack the mainframe, get a good deal on the ether crystals, give the other barbarian a good pummeling. 7 to 9, yes but, wherein you do what you set out to do, but it comes back with some sort of drawback, right? Or it's a twisted way that's essentially what you wanted, but it's not quite what you wanted. It's good enough, but it's not ideal. You cross the rickety bridge, but it collapses, cutting off your way back. You pick the lock, but your lockpick breaks and you'll have to replace it. You intimidate the piranha thugs, but as soon as you're gone, they're gonna put in a call with the big shark that controls this neighborhood. And of course, there's 6 or less, no and, where not only do you not achieve what you set out to do, but something bad happens. Ideally as a consequence of your attempt to do the thing. But not always necessarily if nothing is readily apparent, or the GM has a threat in their back pocket they want to introduce. The fireball blows up in your face, the spectral guards spot you and are now in pursuit, or the foreign spy evades you on the marketplace, and also you got pickpocketed. An underappreciated outcome here, I feel like, is also like the empty victory, where you ostensibly achieve your goal in a procedural manner, but it just turns out that there's nothing here but another threat. The witness you've been searching for died months ago, and whoever's responsible now knows you've been asking questions. The open lockbox doesn't contain the crown jewels after all, but a curse instead. The consul is willing to work with you, but just doesn't have the kind of pull you thought he did. And in fact, your nemesis has something on him that makes him a liability. I've also added 2 additional outcomes, variations of which you may have seen in other Powered by the Apocalypse games. One of them is Snake Eyes, so rolling specifically 2 ones, the lowest possible result. This is called Oh No, and it nullifies whatever huge power bonus you may have on your roll. So even a roll that seems like a sure deal has a small chance of going seriously wrong. You nick an artery and the patient dies on the operating table. A CorpSec tactical unit bursts in on your secret meeting. The dollhouse goes up in flames. It's like the no and outcome, but worse. And what that means you'll have to decide in the moment, because depending on the style and tone of your campaign, getting rejected by your crush and 1 million people die in a nuclear explosion might both be outcomes of that sort of horrific extent. On the flip side, there is hell yes, boxcars, rolling 2 6s, yes and. You achieve what you wanted and you get a little extra, an additional win, something that'll be remembered. You disarm the lead thug so casually that the others all back off. You find the buried legendary rifle and it comes with several cartridges of special ammunition. You satisfy the restaurant critic and they write an absolutely stellar review. You might be asking yourself why none of these outcomes are a simple no, when there is such a thing as a simple yes. And the reason is that I'm trying to maintain narrative momentum. When characters achieve a goal, the story moves forward. But when they don't, it is at risk of stalling. When failing introduces a new complication, as opposed to just being a fail state, it forces them to approach the issue differently than they did before, and it keeps things interesting. It's just pretty boring to have a section where a character just fails at something and then rolls again, and then the exact thing works on the second attempt. It makes the first roll meaningless. In this situation, it'll cost them something. So even when they can try to do the exact same thing again, which may not always be the case, there will have been a price to pay for the earlier failure. Now you might have noticed that there is a little gap over here in the diagram, and that's for 12 or more, which I call yes and, but which is very much the same outcome as boxcars. It's not possible for regular characters to achieve this. You need to have a specific upgrade for it that will allow you to claim boxcars tier critical successes based on rolling 12 or more thanks to your power bonus, as opposed to having to have 2 6s on the dice. When you have this upgrade, it also eliminates snake eyes as a possible outcome as a small little bonus. But what is power, and how do I get it? Well, as we've discussed, your character is made up of tags, power tags specifically, and the more of those power tags are relevant to a role, the bigger the bonus. Now, unlike City of Mist, this isn't linear. Invoking 7 power tags does not mean you get +7 power. How many power tags are required to get how much power can be looked up on this tracker that I'm putting down here. The lower rung representing the number of tags required, known in a different context as dots, and the upper one being the actual numerical bonus, known in a different context as tier. As you can see, invoking 1 tag gives you +1. 2 tags gives you +2, but if you want +3, you'll need 4 tags, and if you want +4, you'll need 7. This may seem like an unnecessarily complicated thing to do, so let me explain why I decided to do it this way. First of all, you need to familiarize yourself with this tracker anyway, because it's the default format of every status effect, including the state of your health in this game. Even if tags and power were 1-to-1, you'd still need to understand this tracker in order to play the game. So I'm not actually making the game more complicated, I am in fact giving you more opportunities to familiarize yourself with this mechanic. The second and main reason is, quite frankly, that I've played this game a lot, like City of Mist specifically, but also playtests of this game, with dozens of different players, and something that I notice very frequently is that players will try to negotiate the most absurd cases to get another little plus on that roll. You'll hear shit like, oh, but I have the Union rep tag, and Union guys are tough, so I should be able to lift more weight. Or I have optimistic disposition, therefore I should be able to sew this quilt more quickly because I'm confident. Or I have Maclock cracking tool, shouldn't that bonus carry over to this card lock as well? A lot of the time they don't even expect to go anywhere with that, but on the off chance that I as a GM say yes to it, they get another +1. That's never a bad thing. The problem is that this sort of negotiation phase where players try to suss out which tags they can actually use in the role is the slowest part of the system. It's what bogs down play the most. It doesn't bog it down by much, but it does slow it down somewhat, and having these sorts of negotiations on every single roll can get pretty fucking annoying. However, when you just pick the obvious tags and then get the +2 or +3 stat bonus they were aiming for, it's not a matter of just convincing the GM for 1 more tag, it's at least 2. And then some more, like if you want to go higher, so they don't bother. And we get rid of this problem with the slowest part of play. And people build more interesting characters with more diverse skill sets. Also, from a narrative perspective, +3 is pretty damn good as stat bonuses go in Powered by the Apocalypse. +4 is tremendous. It gives you pretty good chances. But if you roll like +7, what is even the point? Like, unless you do Snake Eyes, which is very unlikely, you're just gonna do the thing. It takes a lot of the tension out of the story, so it's something I like to reserve for very particular situations. And additionally, it creates a stronger incentive to use the mechanics for creating statuses and story tags creatively. Not just say, I hit them hard, because if you do that creatively, then you can get back to some absurdly high power bonuses on a roll. You just have to do interesting things and teamwork for it. Because every roll can be affected by statuses as well. Always the highest positive and the highest negative status, which add and subtract dots from the tracker depending on their own tier. A status can be anything, like injury, focus drugs, being on fire, having the strategic high ground, being cursed with bad luck, or looking at something with fresh eyes. They can apply to anything as well, which usually means characters, including NPCs who might be running around with a tier 3 force field, but also locations, meaning that it can be tier 5 dark in that spooky cave. A great example on how to deal with that would be to change that status by illuminating the cave, whether by reducing the darkness status or adding an illumination status. Even if the light source you summon isn't quite enough to completely eliminate the darkness, it will at least reduce it and its adverse effects. Story tags do essentially the same thing, except they always have a dot value of 1. However, any number of story tags can apply to a given role, and of course they apply in addition to statuses. They basically function exactly the same as power tags, except that, unless otherwise specified, they can only be used once. Then they are burned and they disappear. The power tags on your character sheet don't burn when you use them, unless you choose to burn them, in which case they provide triple value this one time, but will need to be recovered later. Story tags are great for describing the exact same things power tags are good at describing, like training, gear, or just an entity being present. Some story tags might be seasoned fencer, torch, or guardsman. Often whether or not something should be a status or a story tag can be ambiguous. Torch doesn't make much sense as a status unless you do like a very specific type of darkness fighting dungeon crawler type thing, like, you know, Darkest Dungeon, if you wanted to run a game like that. But fencing ability certainly might make sense on a spectrum. That's okay. We're creating a complete framework for every hypothetical reality here. Just go with what feels right and you will be fine. But how do you make statuses and story tags and all that other shit? How do you do stuff in this game? Place of Thing has 5 core moves that cover pretty much every type of situation. It is of course possible to create custom moves, but these are designed in a way that you will ideally never have to. And the fucked up thing is, City of Mist had like 11, I think, core moves, and I said to myself, oh, I can condense the hell out of this, and then I did, right? I absolutely did. And at some point in the development process of Metro Otherscape, where the people at Son of Oak were trying to also drill down to the essentials of their system, they also came up with pretty much the same 5 moves, which I found very encouraging on one hand, because they clearly know what they're doing when it comes to game design, but I was also like, fuck, God fucking damn it. They have since moved away from those 5 moves for Metro Otherscape. I must admit that I don't necessarily think the new way of doing it is better, it's just different, and I find that it sort of backloads a lot of the complexity that we used to have up front. It's not bad as a mechanic at all, I just don't prefer it, so I stuck with my, 5 core moves. Place of Thing's 5 core moves are in reverse order, which just so happens to be the ascending order of complexity, thank you alphabet. Risk, the simplest of them. Anytime you do something that carries risk, whether that be climbing along the side of a ravine, traversing the urban warscape, stealing an egg from a toucan bear, or uploading a Trojan into the security guard's optics. The purpose of this move is to cover a very large amount of situations and potentially lead to escalation. To require a character to risk is in and of itself a risk. It creates an additional roll, and in this system, every roll can go wrong. So you're introducing a potential point of failure. If ever you want to illustrate just how dangerous a certain enemy or situation is, you can make it so the characters need to risk whenever they're trying to interact with them. Like for instance, they're trying to get something from a silver-tongued negotiator, they might have to take a risk in addition to whatever move you're having them make to see if she doesn't upsell them. Approaching a battle mage wrapped in a cloak of flame may also take a risk if you want to attack them in close range, while at long range you might have to risk to see if they don't block your spell. Know is also pretty straightforward. It's when you want your character to know something, which could mean either that they already had this information or that they learn it anew. You could be recalling your education at the Intergalactic Academy, doing research at the Arcane Library, investigating a crime scene, or mapping a derelict vessel in deep space. The more power you have, the more questions you get to ask, and the GM must answer them truthfully. Of course, the GM also needs to control the pacing of the narrative, so if you ask a question like, "Who is the killer?" which is a completely legitimate question to ask, they can choose not to give a direct answer, but must give a good clue that'll move the story forward instead. The limitation here is also that you can't get information that just isn't there. If you're interrogating someone and they just don't know where the Thieves Guild's hideout is, the GM may reject your question, and you can ask a different one instead. You don't lose that question, but you can't, there's not going to be an answer there. Some Powered by the Apocalypse purists may bristle at this, because if the dice and the move say that I can ask this random person this question, they better have the answer. And I think that those people have never actually constructed a good mystery adventure. As you can probably see, the risk factor of this move is reduced compared to the others. Only Snake Eyes creates a hard move against you. And this was actually a tough design decision because it slightly moves away from the very established Powered by the Apocalypse structure. But during play, I often found that this move was used especially early in the game because the players were trying to gain an understanding of the situation. In the narrative, they often did this cautiously, and rolling poorly on a roll like this often stalled or derailed play because suddenly a threat had to arise that would ultimately lead the party to embark on this adventure blindly, always only reacting to things they didn't understand. I think that this is fine for some adventures, but it should be pretty rare in my opinion. The way the move is written still leaves ample room for danger though. Like on a 7 to 9, you can still create a situation where they're required to use the risk move, potentially introducing tension. Or you can tease an additional point of danger you might spring on them later. Plus, because even rolling under 6 gives you the obvious information, characters never leave completely empty-handed, just shrugging their shoulders, like not knowing at all what to do next. Fight is the move that you use to, fight, which includes not just duels at high noon and desperate sword fights on a muddy battlefield, but also political debates, battle of the bands type situations, arguments in court. Any situation where you're working against active opposition is what this move is for. And unlike what you might be used to in RPGs, it very much never signifies a single attack, but a whole, sort of exchange of blows, a back and forth in which we see who has the upper hand. It's a whole little sequence of combat after which the situation will have changed in a meaningful way. With this move you can achieve tactical goals, but also impose statuses, mainly statuses of hurt probably. That status will be equal to your power if you choose that option, which is pretty mighty. If you hit someone with a status that would go on the same tracker, if the new status is higher, it rises to that higher tier. If it's equal, it rises by 1 tier, and if it's lesser, you add that many dots to the tracker. You can also choose to increase it by a whole nother tier if you roll well enough, but beware! Fighting is inherently volatile and dangerous, so you're going to get hit with something even if you succeed, unless you spend one of your options on avoiding that effect. It might not necessarily be that the enemy hits you in turn, it could be you sprain something, become exhausted, or they take the discussion in a direction where your prepared arguments no longer are that relevant. Their friends might see that they're in danger. In other words, chances are you will suffer a status as well, but you can avoid or at least diminish that with the Endure move. This is what you do anytime you're trying to diminish or weather the effects of an incoming status, which could very well mean tanking it or evading a blow, but also surviving in a harsh environment on a toxic world, resisting the effects of torture, or utilizing a security system to block a home invasion. If you have defensive statuses and tags, this is where they become relevant. The idea is that you should always be able to endure in order to at least attempt to minimize the danger. Though there may be some situations and some statuses where you don't get this opportunity, maybe there was no way for you to resist anyway, the sun is exploding. To GMs, I recommend using these very sparingly, maybe even applying them to the environment, not the players, and always making them temporary for just a scene or so. It's just one scene where the sun explodes. This move also does not carry the danger of an additional hard move consequence if you fail, because, it's already something that happens inherently as a last resort because of a GM hard move. I'm not trying to punish you. Statuses are extremely versatile though, and you can and should use them to your advantage, because the GM sure as shit will. The best way to create statuses is the change move, perhaps the most complicated, but also the most versatile of moves, which allows you to create pretty much anything that is within your power to change as a character. You can erect barricades, heal wounds, rally the support of the crowd, deploy one of your combat drones, create a distraction, and any number of other things. It's not just that you can create and change statuses, you can also create temporary story tags, which is, for instance, the primary way of conjuring aid, like the aforementioned combat drone, or an elemental, or even your bodyguard. These function like power tags, but unless you make them permanent, they disappear after you use them. You could, for instance, create a fire elemental story tag, maybe give it the status of blazing heat, or story tags like Flame Lance or Tactical Intelligence, and then you could use it to fight, because it is now an entity that can take and dish out statuses on your behalf. To do this, you use the resource shift, the shift you get being equal to your power and the shift you spend being equal to dots on a status tracker. The astute among you might have noticed that this is significantly less powerful than the kinds of power equals tier statuses you can get with the fight move. And that is true. But remember, when you fight, there is a strong chance you will suffer major consequences even if you roll very well, which just isn't the case here. You can also stock up on shift ahead of time, maybe in a situation where you are in your workshop and can make use of the tags there, then spend it as needed, giving you a little more control over that resource as opposed to fight. I would recommend at the table running that sort of thing more as a flashback in order to avoid players just like rolling and rolling and rolling while they're in the workshop just to fill up their shift tanks in case they need it. Like if they mess up the roll in the flashback, whatever consequence their messing up had will make itself known on that battlefield at that precise moment. Just allow them to use their workshop power tags on the battlefield, because you don't want every episode to just be in the workshop or to make them feel completely useless. There is a level of abstraction to all these moves. A specific narrative situation could be represented with different ones. An interrogation could be trying to know in order to learn information, or trying to fight in order to make them testify in court. Getting a key from a guard can be a risk if you just want to get the key, or change if you want to also distract them from what they're doing. Maybe it's even a fight. What matters is the narrative intent of the players and the game master. In addition to the 5 core moves, there are also the cinematic moves, which you don't really roll for necessarily. They just give you certain bonuses, like downtime, which happens when you have some downtime to recover or prepare for your next job, or push beyond your limits, which allows you to do something huge and beyond the usual scope of what your character could ordinarily do. Basically anything that is thematically within their skill set, even if it would be technically impossible at a price. The key to what is actually within your character's skill set are your themes, which constitute your character sheet essentially. Themes are a collection of power tags based around a certain facet of your character, and they grow, change, and disappear as your character changes, as characters in stories tend to do. This means that at the end of the campaign, a character could have very different skills than they did at the beginning. But themes are much more than just skills as well. They are like your personality, equipment, community, life events that have influenced you, your social status, your close relationships. Your character might be a proficient race car driver, but as they change and grow, the theme that represented the skill set, as well as perhaps the theme that represented the race car, they both disappear and are replaced by, I don't know, maybe like them being a popular figure in the community they were kicked out of once, right? This is a community that this was a whole story arc for them. Oh, I want to get back with my people, right? And the new resilience they learned after the big crash that they had. None of this necessarily means that they are no longer capable of race driving in the fiction. It's just no longer relevant to their story at this time. It's not that important anymore. So it no longer affects the mechanics of the game. Maybe someday they will find their way back to it. Maybe not. Every character starts out with 3 themes. Yes, that's right, 3. Not 4 like in City of Mist. You can unlock a 4th slot for a theme as part of the long-term character progression. It's in fact probably the very first thing you're going to unlock. And I did this in order to create space for a character to really dig themselves into the campaign world they're playing in. Like, we all know this experience of making a character in a world that we have some idea about it, but we don't fully understand it yet. It's a new world. And as we play, we become invested in it, we understand the specifics, the things that matter to us. This is like the classic hero's journey, where at some point that world has accepted us, left its mark on us, right? This is what that fourth theme is for. It will come up at a regular point of change that will turn it into a major point of change somewhat early on in the story, like when Jon Snow joins the Night Watch. When maybe also a bit later in the story, but not so late in the overarching story, like Luke and Han getting their medals at the end of... I'm pretty sure it's the first Star Wars film. I'm pretty sure. I'm not 100% on that. What this move looks like will heavily depend on the kind of game you're playing, but gaining that extra theme completes the character by letting the world get its hooks in there. A theme is created using a theme sheet, which is essentially like a questionnaire about that specific facet of your character. Each answer to each question is a power tag. These questions are pretty loose and open-ended, so if you come at the character creation process with a specific power tag in mind, you can probably find a question where that answer will fit. The idea is that you will answer the first question on the sheet, the answer to which also serves as the name of that theme, and then choose from the other questions to build as you see fit. These other questions are designed to make tags for certain aspects of that main question, not create power tags that always stack. Though if you mess with the semantics, this is often what you can end up doing. It is at that point the GM's job to put a stop to it. It's pretty much like the one singular way you can power game this system, as opposed to like the million clandestine ways that every other system has. What you want to do is you want to find a balance between hyper-specialization and versatility. You can do an evocation magic theme with the power tags Pyromancy, Dragonstar, Fireball, and Searing Hellfire, right? Which is going to give you a really good power bonus when you cast Fireball specifically. But if you run into a big old stone golem that doesn't burn very well, you'll be out of luck. A different power tag loadout that covers more aspects of evocation magic and can be used more creatively will keep you useful in more situations, just not necessarily as powerful. Some of the questions will give you a theme's weakness tag. It's Achilles' heel, it's major problem. If a situation arises where the weakness tag becomes relevant, knock down a whole tier of power, just a whole tier. That's right, not just a dot, a whole tier. This is to make sure players don't activate their weakness tag just to farm attention in moments where they would make no difference. We'll get into what attention is later. It's basically XP. Every time your weakness tag activates, you get to mark attention on that theme, and once you have enough attention, you can grow the theme and get more power tags. The core theme sheets that are in the game right now are aggression, alteration, attribute, conviction, etiquette, event, gear, haven, influence, knowledge, manifestation, movement, personality, profession, protection, relationship, skill, and standing. And I might add more ones in the future. Any facet of your character could be described by a variety of themes. If that facet is particularly important to you, you might even deliberately use several themes to describe different facets of that facet. Your high-end space fighter would most easily be described by a gear theme, but movement, aggression, maybe skill, or even haven could work as well. Taking several of them is entirely valid, but it will of course take up more space and make the space fighter a bigger part of your character. Each theme has one of three colors, which you could also call like a type. It's physical, red, mental, blue, or social, green. City of Mist has two colors, Logos and Mythos. Metro Otherscape has three colors as well, but they're Self, Mythos, and Noise. You might find that these three colors don't fit your vibe. Maybe you want to run a Magic the Gathering Planeswalkers game and would prefer the colors be blue, black, red, green, and white. Have at it! It won't break the game unless you have like a huge amount of colors without much purpose. And while the gear theme sheet is physical by default, if your gear is a bunch of dazzling like outfits, make it social. Influence is social, but if your influence is primarily over code sprites in cyberspace, make it mental. Knowledge is mental, but if it's about muscle memory, make it physical. The colors are not hard-coded. Theme color only matters when you're using the push beyond your limits move, in which case they're a pretty big deal, and in certain situations where your character is quickly assessed. Like if you want to enter a club, characters with one or less social colored themes might have to risk in order to get past the bouncer, but such situations should be pretty rare, and more focused on maybe getting rewards. Something else that isn't hard-coded is the theme's aspect. There's 3 kinds of those as well, though they do not overlap with the theme colors. You can assign whichever you find most fitting. A goal is something you care about achieving, an identity is a strong core belief about yourself and your place in the world that is tied to this theme, and a mystery is a question you really want to get some answers to. Each theme has one of these aspects, and part of the game is to bring them into conflict with the story and each other. Like, say your party is about to slay the evil wizard, but they telepathically tell you that if you find a way to spirit them away before they can be executed, they will give you some answers to your mystery, where did the Tower of the Conclave disappear to? Or there is finally an opportunity to get something done politically to fulfill your goal of revitalizing Harlem, but it would mean getting a city council seat for that position, and it would clash with your identity of I do not desire power over others. These are dilemmas, right? There's no right or wrong way to decide with these things. It's about creating the conflict and seeing how it plays out. The heart of all fiction. If you make a sacrifice to abide by one of your aspects, you mark attention on that theme. If you go against the aspect of one of your themes, you mark crack on that theme. Once you have 3 attention on a theme, you get to unlock a new power tag or remove the crack. Because if you get 3 crack on a theme and you would mark crack again, you lose that theme. It's just gone. The theme slot opens back up, you can put a new theme there that will grow, and you get some long-term experience point to grow your character with, but the old theme is no longer that important to your life, and has been replaced with something else. You might still have that job, rank, or belief, but it's no longer as important as it used to be. This is, for many people, what the game is about. The back and forth of themes, the constant change of characters through time. There's an element of long-term progression, but it's secondary to the granular day-to-day of what happens on your character sheet. You can't really miss-skill a build, your character will just look different eventually anyway. This is one of the great departures from traditional role-playing games into an approach more like that which actual fiction and drama use, and I quite like it. But you don't have to run it like that. The document I have is full of alternate rules and ideas to inspire you to take the basic thing and play it your way. Even if you play essentially vanilla, there is a long-term character advancement option that allows you to harden a theme, making it more permanent as a part of your character, and then you don't have to worry about it as much. You could also just go another way. Don't use themes at all. I've done this in one of the hacks I made with this sort of skeleton. It's all in the document. Just a massive section of examples on how to fill out theme sheets in various genres, as well as hazards. I also put hazards in there, which is but also not really monsters, right? They also include environmental conditions and challenges to overcome in general. Creating all those rules and theme kits and hazards did actually take the longest out of the whole process of making this. And they're probably the least important part, given that it's mainly supposed to be a resource for your own hacking needs. So I understand why it took Son of Oak so long to make Otherscape. There's a lot of lore in there that plays around with the mechanics. So yeah, that's really it for an overview. Go check it out. Use it however is convenient to you. I know this is something that only very few people will actually care about. Not just as a video topic, but just in general. This is a lot of work to put into something pretty niche, but that's the kind of shit I live for, right? I like to contribute to the intellectual and creative labor of the hobby. Thank you very much for watching this video. Like, comment, subscribe, share this to your relevant communities. Also consider buying some of my merchandise. Maybe my short story collection. Sorry that this was a bit of a small one, considering how long it's been since the last video, but my illness really knocked the fucking air out of my lungs for a while, literally. And also I'm still taking care of my partner sometimes. I was the first to get sick, so I was also the first to recover. I think the next video will be, it will be controversial, but I gotta put my nose down to it, and I have another major thing lined up for the coming months that I know a lot of you are anxiously waiting for. So, see you around, cunts.